shows the mark of sanctity or holiness because it is a language we use for God. We speak to God in this language. We don't, since Latin is now a dead language, we don't really speak to one another in Latin, but we use it as our language for God. It is like the French, when they use certain words in French, the vous form of French is more solemn. It's more, it shows more of a reverence, and they use it when they're speaking to a more formal way, and they used to use it anyway in the way they spoke to God. They would use the vous form. And in the same way, Latin keeps that mark of sacredness, of reverence and respect. And remember that the Mass, first of all, is for the veneration of God, and only second is it for the instruction of the people. And so the Latin it's not taking away from what's going on in the Mass. It is giving reverence and devotion to God. It actually facilitates adoration because you recognize that you're speaking in a different language. You're addressing yourself to God in a language that is as ancient as the Catholic religion, and that all the saints use this same prayer. And so when you say, Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, you're speaking the same words that were spoken by all the saints throughout the years in the Western Church. So many saints use that same prayer. Also, the Church teaches that when an exorcism is done, that Latin is more efficacious. And so the exorcisms are always done in Latin. You'll notice that even at a baby's baptism, in the traditional church, I mean, that the entire baptism can be in the vernacular. That is, all the ceremonies and the prayers, they can be in the vernacular. But when you say the exorcism over the child, you say it in Latin. Now, many monks throughout the Middle Ages, and the nuns too, they recited the breviary in Latin all the way up till, the recent years. They always recited the breviary in Latin, and they didn't understand it that well. Many of the monks, many of the nuns were rather unlearned. They just came from farms, from little villages, and they hadn't had much schooling. And so Latin was very difficult for them. You know this even among some of the great saints like St. John Vianney and St. Joseph Cupertino. Latin was very difficult for them. Though it always makes me laugh when people think that St. John Vianney was so bad in Latin, and his Latin was superior to any of the priests that are around today. But they just would, in his day, priests were able to converse with one another in Latin. So anyway, he wasn't that well versed in it, but he understood it, and he prayed it in his breviary every day. And St. Teresa said that because she did not understand the Latin when she prayed from her breviary, that her prayer was more efficacious because it wasn't hers. It was the prayer of the church. So keep that in mind. Whenever you're praying in Latin, you are praying in union with all the saints throughout the centuries, with all the monks and nuns throughout the world. And so it keeps that mark of holiness. I remember reading an article, I don't remember what magazine it was in, Time or Newsweek, but it struck it got my attention because on the cover of the article, it was all these young people, like college-age kids. They're all practicing this Eastern religion. They're doing like a transcendental meditation, and they had pictures of these kids like in these postures of yoga and burning incense and chanting in other languages. And the reporters asked these young people, why are you doing this? You don't even understand this language. And they said, well, it's because it's mysterious. It keeps that mystery of religion. Well, that's precisely one of the reasons why we have the Latin language still in the Mass, because it keeps that mystery of our faith. It keeps the reverence, and it's a language set aside for God. The Latin language also keeps the mark of Catholicity or universality. The word Catholic, by the way, just means universal. A lot of Protestants will say things like, Catholic's not even in the Bible. Well, no kidding. I mean, the word Catholic is a Greek word that means universal. And what happened in the early Christian period was there started, as there always has been, there started to be divisions. As I've been telling you in many different sermons, the devil has always strove to divide Christians from one another. That's his battle plan, is to divide us. And so even in the early Christian period, he sought to divide the Christians from one another. And the way he did so was by just causing them to have disagreements over certain issues of the religion, of the faith. And so there started to be different factions of Christianity. And because there are these different factions, in order to understand, when people asked you, what Christian are you? I'm a Christian. Well, what branch do you belong to? The ones who belong to the universal church, who were under the Pope in Rome, and who belonged to the Christian religion that was spread all over Europe, would say, I am a Catholicus. I am a member of the universal church. And that's how the word Catholic started to be used. Already back in the 3rd century, they were using the word Catholic to describe the Christians who were under Rome, who were under the Pope. So getting back to what I was saying to you about universality, the mark of universality is kept by the Latin language because it can be used all over the world, everywhere, in every country, in every land. No matter where you go, Latin can be understood. Scholars throughout the centuries have studied Latin. Universities used to teach in Latin. And so everywhere you went, there were people there who understood the Latin language. It's the language of the universal church, of the Catholic Church. And so it can be used all over the world, everywhere. And as I told you, it's similar to that mark of unity. No matter where you go, if the Latin is being used, you understand the Mass. And people who say, I can't understand the Mass, are really just being lazy, because that's why you have your missals. And that's why I asked you all to bring your missals, so that when we study the prayers of the Mass, you'll be able to just read along with me. You'll be able to follow right along. Even though we're talking about a prayer that is said in Latin in the Mass, you'll understand what the priest is saying. You'll understand the symbolism behind it, that every single movement, every single prayer of the Mass has a purpose, has a meaning behind it. And finally, the Latin language keeps the mark of the church, that the church is apostolic, that it goes back to the time of the apostles. And of course it keeps that mark, because the church was founded in Rome by Saints Peter and Paul.